Okay, let me repeat. For today's lecture seminar series, we have two topics to be covered: requirements engineering and software evolution. Before we start, so as you can see, for this morning, we will look at requirements engineering. But of course, I want to know what is your expectation of this topic. I'm sure you have maybe taken courses related to requirements engineering, so you have initial idea of what it is. Before we proceed, can you share your expectations? What do you expect we will cover from this topic, or what do you expect you can learn from this out of this topic? I'll give you about 1 or 2 minutes, enough, yeah? You can go to this link. I'm using Padlet. You write padlet.com/norazian_mdh/SWEBOK. Yeah, so make sure you write your expectation under the first column. Yeah? Please do not add another new column. There is one column that I've prepared over there. Can you just write below that title, write your expectation of this topic. I'll give you 1 to 2 minutes for you to do it. Okay, just in any case, if you are joining this online seminar using your phone, you cannot scan your attendance, you can chat or PM me privately, so that I can scan or include your attendance manually. Okay. Can you go to the Padlet? As you can see in the given link, just add simple expectation, a simple statement. Okay, ada dah buat? All right, so I can see Banyak over here. Okay. So you can just write any kind of expectation that you have. Maybe before this, you are familiar with software engineering. You know that requirements engineering is a part of software engineering. It's okay if you don't know how to express it in your own words, just as long as you can write it in simple explanation is enough, right? Okay. Let me see a few of your answers over here. Okay. Expect to learn what are the types and steps for requirement engineering. All right, that's good. So meaning to say, you know that there are some processes involved in requirement engineering. Able to learn new knowledge in the field. Okay, so maybe requirements engineering is a new term for you. Expecting to learn more about what is included in engineering design process, like maybe documenting or maintaining requirements. Okay, let us see. Could be maintaining afterwards in software evolution. Learning steps required to build system modeling. We will not learn about the whole steps in developing a system. We will be focusing on just one bit of that step. Learn how the solution we propose fully fit the needs and steps in requirement engineering. Okay, yeah, we will learn that. Full process of creating a program. Unfortunately, you don't have your name over here, 61215. Unfortunately, no, we will not learn about the full process of creating a program today, because requirements engineering is not the whole software development process. It's only one part of it. Yeah. Learning about software engineering process, yes, but only a part of it, not all. Learn to collect requirements with software engineering's way. Yes, that's good. Because requirements engineering will involve collecting requirements. My expectation is to be more understanding about the related topic and can use it in the future. Hopefully, inshallah. So you need to pay attention so that you can apply this because requirements engineering is very important. It is one of the important steps when we want to create a program or a system. We need that information, that knowledge actually. Important and necessary requirement that can be applied. Okay, you want to know what is requirement, what type of requirement that can be applied, would be able to understand more about real-world software engineering process, use and practices. Again, as I said, not the whole software engineering process, but a part of it. Able to learn the steps and persons who involve in requirement engineering. Yes, not only the steps, but the people as well who will involve in requirements engineering. Learn about the process of requirement engineering. Yes, able to gain knowledge from the requirements that are needed in engineering. Okay, so mostly, okay, I'll just go through. Okay, mostly you mentioned about requirements, the processes involved, okay, and then how it is applied in real world. Even though we will not have like a real project that we will do during this lecture series, during this lecture, but I will give examples that you can apply. Okay, good. So basically, you're in the right track, you're in the right path. You do understand, or you know what to expect of this topic. Okay, let us go back to the slide. Okay. Before we go into requirements engineering, it is very important for us to know in which phase requirements engineering is required. As you can see, during this SE methods lecture seminar series, actually it involves the whole development processes when we want to create a certain program or certain software. What you see over here is the software development cycle. This is the basic processes involved when we want to develop a program. So we start off with planning, analysis, design, implementation, testing and integration, maintenance. And then as you can see, it repeats. It is an iterative process. It goes back to planning, analysis. It repeats the whole processes. That's why we call it as cycle. Yeah, it repeats. So for requirements engineering, where the activities will be conducted. As you can see, requirements engineering, it starts in the earlier phase. I will tell you why. So meaning to say from planning, starting from planning, you will start to do requirements engineering. So it will go to from planning to analysis and even design as well. Process 1, 2, and 3. The reason why requirements engineering start off at earlier phases, because whenever you want to create a new program, if you want to build a new system, you need to have, or you need to know requirements. So meaning to say requirements is like a prerequisite. You understand the concept of prerequisite, right? So you need to know requirements first, then you can start to do the design of your system, implementation, testing, and so forth. So as you can see, it starts off from planning, analysis, then maybe involve design as well, but mostly in planning and analysis. For this topic, I will be using this case study. As I said just now, we don't have any project, right? So I will be based on this case study to give you example. You can try to read the case study for a while. As you can see, I'm using mental health care patient management system. So this is basically a system that is intended to be used in all clinics. And then it makes use of centralized database of patient information, also designed to run on a local PC so that it can be available locally, as well as, meaning to say with and without network connectivity. So based on this case study, I will give you examples. All right, done reading the case study, just a simple information, nothing complicated, right? Okay. So to know what is requirements engineering, we need to understand these two terms, requirements and engineering. But I'm sure you have understood what is engineering, right? So engineering, it involves the processes, any kind of processes, the steps, activities, procedures, in order for us to do a certain things related to the domain. So in this example, it is actually related to software engineering, right? So to understand requirements, the requirements for a system are the statements of what the system should do, like the services that it should provide, as well as the constraints on its operation. What does it mean? As you can see over here, requirements is actually statements. Statements meaning to say you can write it in English language or any other language used around the world. But for us, uh, we need to choose the language that we understand, and then that is universal. So that's why usually when we create requirements, when we write requirements, we write it in English statements, right? And then requirements should consist of these two things, services and constraints of the system. Services meaning to say, what do you want the system to be able to do once it is up and running? So those are services. So meaning to say, the functionalities, the features, right? Anything that the system is able to do. And then the constraints on its operation, meaning to say, of course, for a system, we need to apply constraints. Constraints here means that we need to set some boundary. We need to set some limitations, yeah, for it. For example, like if we have a system, for example, a students registration system, students who wants to register at every semester, yeah, register courses at every semester. So we want to ensure that for a university, because it is big, right? We have many students, and then if we allow registration for a certain time frame, for example, just for 2 days, maybe today and tomorrow, you are allowed to register for your courses that you will be taking for this semester. So of course, we want to ensure the system can enable access from many students. So that is one of the example of the constraint that we need to apply to the operation. Okay, and then where do we get these requirements? These requirements, we get them from the needs of customers, because you need to ask um, who will be using the system, who is procuring the system, who wants the system to be built. Of course, you want to get requirements from them, but assuming you are the developer, you can also provide requirements for the system. But mostly the requirements should be from the client, from the customer. So when we have these processes, the process of finding out the requirements, analyzing the requirements, documenting them, and checking the services and constraints. So all of these processes, we call them as requirements engineering. Yeah. So these are some of the steps for requirements engineering. As you can see, requirements engineering is only a part of uh, a small portion, yeah, I don't know, small or big portion, but it is a part of software development itself. That's why we have an engineering process for it. Because requirements engineering is very important. It is actually a critical process before we can build the system, right? So why are requirements important? As I said just now, it is a critical process. Let us see the link that we have over here. I took it from Wikipedia because I'm looking for examples, but you can rely on this. Let me share it, yeah. You can also open the link yourself after this. So you can see these are lists of failed and over budget custom software projects. And then you can see why the projects have failed and over budget. You can see over there, over here, note that failed projects and projects running over budget are not necessarily the sole fault of employees or businesses creating the software. In some cases, problems may be due partly to problems with purchasing organization, including, as you can see, poor requirements, over ambitious requirements, unnecessary requirements. So as you can see, requirements engineering is very important. If you have poorly designed requirements, because based on that requirements, you need to develop the system. So if you have poorly designed requirements, then you will build a poorly designed system. And so, and also, if you have over ambitious requirements, for example, you just listed every possible or every requirements that you can think of without thinking whether it is achievable or not. At the end of the day, it can cause the project to be over budget, over schedule, because you cannot meet the requirements. You cannot implement the features that listed in the requirements. And also, if you have unnecessary requirements, it will be taking a lot of time, yeah? And then at the end of the day, your customer will be like, I don't need this kind of features in the system. So it will be a waste of time and money because you have developed the system with unnecessary requirements. So that shows how requirements is very important. Yeah, requirements engineering. So you can open the link on your own, right? Or maybe you can search, you can just search for examples online. You can see that mostly the problems or the factors that cause failure in program will be relating to requirements as well as testing, because these two are very important. Yeah. So far, do you have any question? Baru mula kan, dah ada soalan.
Yes, madam, I have a question.
Hopefully you understand what is a requirement. Nanti kita akan go in detail. So for requirements, there are actually different levels of how we want to present the requirements. So requirements written in different levels may become useful to different types of readers in order to understand the requirements. Because when it comes to software development, not only it involves the development team, it also involves your customer, your client. So your customer or your client might not have technical background, but mostly they will not have the technical background. You as a developer, you know all the technical terms, yeah, all the functionalities, the features, but for your customer, for your client, they only know what they want to have in the system. They don't know how to express it in a technical term, yeah. So that's why when we want to present, when we want to write the requirements, we need to write it in different level, right? We can compare a manager who is not interested in the detailed features of the system versus a system developer who needs to know more precisely what the system will do because he or she will be involved in the system implementation. So of course, we cannot have just one type of requirements. We need to have different levels of requirements so that the requirements can be fully understood by every party, whether the manager or the developer, right? So we can see over here, there are two types or two levels of requirement that you can write. We have user requirements and system requirements. So user requirements will be targeting readers of uh, from from your client, from your customer, from the target user. So meaning to say, if you want to write user requirements, the statements must be written in a natural language with diagrams of what the services that the system provides and the constraints under which it must operate. But you need to use non-technical terms, or layman terms. However, for system requirements, a more detailed descriptions of the system's functions, services, and operational constraints. The system requirements document should define exactly what it is to be implemented. So you can see when you compare over here for user requirements, just as long as you write what are the services, what are the constraints. However, for system requirements, you need to be more detailed. You can see example. So example, this is based on the case study just now, mental health care patient management system. So under user requirement definition, how you can write the user requirement, the MHCPMS shall generate monthly management reports showing the cost of drugs prescribed by each clinic during that month. So as you can see over here, it lists the service that needs to be included inside the system. Just enough for the reader to understand what kind of service it offers. However, when you look at system requirement specification, the same requirement from user requirement, but when you write it as a system requirements, it must be more detailed. On the last working day of each month, a summary of the drugs prescribed, their costs, and the prescribing clinics shall be generated. The system shall automatically generate the report for printing after 5:30 on the last working day of the month. A report shall be created for each clinic and shall list the individual drug names, the total number of prescriptions, the number of doses prescribed, and the total cost of the prescribed drugs. If drugs are available in different dose units, for example, 10 milligram, 20 milligram, separate reports shall be created for each dose units. Access to all cost reports shall be restricted to authorized users listed on a management access control list. So you can see the difference here. User requirement, enough if you list the services offered. But system requirements, you list the services offered, but it must be written in a detailed form. Okay, understand the difference in between this level? So meaning to say, if you don't have any technical background, when you read the user requirement definition, you can straight away understand it. However, for software developers, they need to know the system requirements because they will develop the system later on. It is not enough to have user requirement. Yeah. Okay, everyone understand? I hope I'm not going too fast or too slow. Boleh. Yeah, you can write in the chat box if you have any question. Okay, now, just now we have covered the different levels of how requirements should be written, because we want to make the reader easier to read the requirements. Okay, now we go to the requirements itself, the statements for representing the requirements. The system requirements, as you can see over here, referring to the system requirements, meaning to say it must be written in a detailed form, are often classified as functional requirements and non-functional requirements. Because we want to write the system requirements more detailed, it must be divided into two types of requirements. So what is a functional requirements? It is basically the statements of services the system should do, and sometimes we also need to write what the system should not do, and then how the system should react to a particular input, how the system should behave or respond in particular situations. That is basically the functional requirements. Basically, if you still remember, I in my class, usually I always mention this because it is the most basic process when involving system. Input, process, output. So we need to, for functional requirements, we need to understand if given certain input, and then how, and then it process the input, what are the services it will offer. Okay, so basically for functional requirements, all of the statements involving the services, how it will react to input, how it will react to certain situations. Okay, I have a question over here. Let's say I pick up a project from a client and able to fully meet the requirement for the project. What if the client wanted to add more features and functionality for the project? Do I need to add a new requirement and present it again to my client? Okay. All right. This is if it is still under the schedule for software development, then yes, you need to add the new requirement and present it again. Okay. Okay. Let me read again the question whether I have answered correctly. Yeah. Or able to fully meet the requirement. Okay. There are two situations over here. If you have met your client, you have get all of the requirements, and then you have started with the software development, and then you have completed, actually you have completed the project. Then once the project is completed, you deliver your system to your client, right? So meaning to say the software development phase has completed, has finished, but you still have, usually after development, you still have the software maintenance phase, meaning to say once you have completed, you give to your client, then you still need to get feedback from them. So in this case, if let's say your client, once they uses your system, they have new requirement they propose to you. So meaning you need to get that new requirement, and then you need to present again to your client. And then you need to, if your client approves, then you need to include that requirement into your system. Because as you can see, for software engineering development cycle or software engineering, a software development life cycle, software maintenance is a part of it. So meaning to say, once you have completed your system, you give to your client, it is not done like that. Yeah. So you still have like maybe your client have arranged a contract whereby after they receive your system, maybe about 6 months, they give you about 6 months, they will use the system and give it back to you. So during that 6 months, when they use the system, if they have any errors, bugs, or new requirement, then you need to add it into your system. Unless in the second situation, you have completed your system, your client has used your system for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, that's a long time. Basically, your contract has finished with them. You don't have any other development with them, with your client. So if let's say after 3 years, they have a new requirement to be added inside your system, they cannot just simply ask you to add it. They need to create another contract for it. So that is real world implementation. Okay, Zulfika, did I answer your question correctly? I hope you understand. Saya takut saya cepat sangat cakap ke ataupun maybe my explanation tak clear ke. Boleh faham? Okay. So that is real world situation. Alright. Dah cover? Belum. Okay. Now, the second type of requirements will be non-functional. So non-functional meaning to say anything not related to the services. So non-functional is where we will cover the constraints on the services or functions offered by the system. So this includes the timing constraints, development process constraints, and constraints imposed by standards. So this is basically non-functional, not related to what the system offers, the services that offers by the system. For non-functional requirements, often apply to the system as a whole rather than individual services or features. Meaning to say, when you want to write the non-functional requirements, you need to look at the perspective that the system has been completed as a whole. So what are the constraints that we need to apply to the system? Or what are the constraints that the system should apply to its operation? Let us look in detail for functional requirements. Functional requirements depend on the type of system to be developed, the expected uses of the system, and the general approach taken by the organization when writing the requirements. So basically, of course, functional requirements need to be depending on the type of system that you want to develop. If let's say you want to develop a clinical or a clinic management system, so requirements must be related to clinic domain. It must not related to student registration system. All right. And then who are the expected users of the system? You also need to know who are them so that you can create or produce the functional requirements suitable for the system that you want to develop. As well as you need to also take into account the business processes by the organization that will be using the system. Of course, the organization, maybe they have some sort of rules, regulations, standards that needs to be followed. For example, if you want to create a salary management system for a certain company, of course, you need to follow their way of calculating the salary. So you need to write your requirements based on how the company calculate the salary, and then who can provide the authorization to produce or to set the salary and so forth. So these are the three things that you need to include, or you need to take note when you want to create the functional requirements. So in principle, the functional requirements should have the following properties: consistency, validity, completeness, and feasibility. What are them? Consistency, meaning to say when you create the functional requirements, it must be consistent all the way. The requirements should not have any contradictory definitions. For example, if we say for the requirements, um, example, contradictory definitions. Okay, maybe if you say that for the system, at first you write the requirements when the user wants to register for an account through the system, the user need to provide just two information, username and password. However, later on when you mention that for the registration of another user account, they need to provide more than two information so that here we have contradictory definition of what the registration functionality should provide. So you need to be consistent all the way when you want to write the functional requirements. And then for validity, validity is very important because you must understand that requirements must be from the customers or the stakeholder. Yeah. So because of that, even though you as the developer, you can propose requirements, you must ensure that the requirements that you propose must meet what the stakeholder wants. So you cannot just simply add any requirements that you feel should be added into the system. You need to ask the customer or the stakeholder whether they agree with the requirements. Okay, so that is validity. And then completeness, all services required by the user should be defined, meaning complete. Whatever the user wants, you have include them as requirements. Yeah. And then lastly, feasibility. The requirements should be achievable and able to be implemented. This is also important. If you still remember the list that I showed you just now, if you have over ambitious requirements that you cannot achieve later on, that you cannot implement as features, as functionality, then your project will become a failure, or maybe over budget, over schedule. So it is very important when you want to decide on functional requirements, it must make sense. Yeah, it must be achievable. You as a developer, you know your own level, you know that you can do it like that. Yeah. For example, if you want to create a system for attendance, so you propose that the user can do attendance using QR code or maybe thumbprint, you know that is achievable. You don't suggest, for example, iris recognition. And then you yourself know that I'm not sure whether I can do that kind of system using iris recognition. So it must be feasible, it must be achievable. These are the four things that is very important for functional requirements. However, you need to also understand because requirements can be very subjective because requirements come from human. Stakeholders are human, you as a developer are humans. We perceive things differently. I understand it differently, you understand it differently. So if I feel like I have written complete requirements, maybe when you read my statements, you feel like it is not complete. Yeah. So that's why um, for functional requirements, it is actually very difficult to make it or to fulfill all the following properties 100%. It is very impossible to make your requirements perfect. Yeah. So, however, you need to try your best. You need to try to achieve for these four properties as the best that you can do. Alright. Okay, boleh faham ya? Ada soalan? Tak ada, saya proceed ya. If you have any question, just ask in the chat box. Yeah. Okay, still under functional requirements. Use cases and user stories can be used to describe the functional requirements. So basically, other than you go and ask your client, your customers, what do they want with the system, you can also use use cases or user stories in order to collect the functional requirements. Number one, use cases. I think all of you have learned or taken OOSD, right? So I'm sure you are familiar with use cases or use case diagram. Basically, when you want to create a use case diagram, you have the uh, oval notation, yeah, where you write the use cases. So use cases are written descriptions of how a user, or we call them as actor in a use case diagram, will perform tasks on a system to achieve a certain goal. So basically, use cases shows the can show the behavior of the system, can also show the interaction in between actor and the system. Basically, use cases are the functionalities that the system offers. That's why when we want to describe the functional requirements, we can use cases. Use case model or use case diagram consists of main elements like use cases, actors, and the relationships between them. And then use cases can be used to describe the functional requirements because they show how a user interacts with the system in order to achieve a desired result or to achieve a certain goal. That is use cases. So you can see example over here. We have actor, the employer. Employer interact with the system by performing managed vacancies. So managed vacancies will be the use case of the system. Just a simple example. Right, number two, user stories. Maybe some of you know about this, some of you are not familiar with user stories. Sorry, yeah. So user story is a note that captures what a user does or needs to do as part of his or her work. Basically, for user stories, you can use it to document what you do on a daily basis. So this is basically referring to uh, the requirements engineering process itself. When you communicate with your client, yeah, and then you as a developer, you suggest ideas. So you can use user stories for this. It uses the concept of 3 Cs: card, conversation, confirmation. You can see the example. I'm not sure whether you can see this very small over here. Uh, so this part, this is the card part. As an employer, I want to post job vacancies. So card will be user stories written in the card in which each has a short sentence to describe what the story is about. So you start off with writing simple statements on a card like this, and then proceed with conversation. So conversation, this part, the second image over here. Conversation requirements are found and refined through a continuous conversation between customers and development team. Important ideas and decisions will be discovered and recorded during the stakeholder meetings. So conversation, whatever that you communicate with your client relating to, like in this example, what are the requirements if as an employer, I want to post job vacancies. So what are the things that the user will do? From there, from this conversation, you can actually retrieve the requirements. Okay, so over here, if you cannot read it, I'll just try to read it. Agreement of statement of purpose for personal data required, employment information, general employer versus employment agency, apa lagi ya, business. So basically all of the information needed for employment. And then the second part is the vacancy information. What are the information required? So when you as a developer, when you communicate with your client, at the same time you are collecting requirements. If the user wants to perform this functional requirement, these are the data that will be required. Employment information, vacancy information. And then after that, followed by confirmation. Confirmation, this is the third image over here. Confirmation will be the acceptance criteria of the user story. During discussions, the customer tells what he or she wants and confirming to the conditions and criteria of the system being accepted or rejected. So meaning to say confirmation will be confirming on the requirements basically, whether to accept it or to reject it. So this is, as you can see, if you can read it, a summary of vacancy is displayed by submitting the form with all compulsory fields. Click on post vacancy, select general. So basically, you list based on the requirements that you have collected from the conversation. You listed the requirements into functional requirements. Then you get confirmation from your client or your customers. Okay, I have another question over here. If I get complaint form from buyer, it's still under user story? Yes, because as you can see over here, get complaint form from buyer. It is an activity, it is a service. Buyer submit complaint form. So you can write the story in a card like this. Okay, buyer submit complaint form. So when you do the conversation part, you need to communicate with your customer. What kind of information will be accepted under the complaint form? Yeah, and then what will be the next activity or the next function followed by the submission of the complaint form. And then after that, you can get confirmation from your customer whether they will reject it or they will accept it. Okay, boleh Danisha? Good question. Okay. Any other question before we can proceed? So basically, for functional requirements, you can use these two approaches, using use cases, using user stories. Which one is the best? It depends actually. There is no best way. If you are familiar with use case diagram, feel free to use use cases. If you want to explore user stories, feel free to use user stories, because both of these still involves the interactions between developer with the customer. So still you need to get it from the customer. Just the way you, how you organize your requirements, how you present your requirements, that will be different when you use use case, when you use user stories. Because when you use use cases, you need to present the requirements in the form of a use case model. All right? No other question? Boleh proceed, Next one, we will look at non-functional requirements. So non-functional requirements not directly concerned with the specific services delivered by the system to its users. And then this is very important. You need to highlight this. For non-functional requirements, it defines the system quality attributes. So you need to relate non-functional with quality attributes of the system that you want to develop. So what are the quality attributes? If you look into it, all the ELIT, TTT words, if you're familiar with it, security, reliability, except performance, maintainability, scalability, usability, and there are many more. Yeah, I only listed few of these. We can see the diagram after this. So basically, involved with the quality attributes. Can you make or create a system only based on functional requirements? That is a question. Can you answer in the chat box? I just want to know your opinion. I repeat the question. Can you build a system solely based on functional requirements? So meaning to say you only collect functional requirements, you don't collect non-functional requirements, and then you build a system, a new system. Can you do it like that? Just a quick yes or no in the chat box. Just want to know your opinion. Okay. Banyak yang jawab no. Ada tak yang jawab yes? Mana tahu ada yang fikir yes. Just functional requirements is enough. No. So a lot of you answer no, meaning to say you do understand the difference in between functional and non-functional requirements. Am I correct or no? Software is more than hands-on development. Okay, so meaning to say software is not only involving the services offered by the system offered by the software. It is more than that, right? Betul Ramadhani? So yes, the answer is actually the answer is yes. You can actually create software solely based on functional requirements, kan? Sebenarnya yes, but you will not be creating a high quality or good quality software. That is the answer. Yes, you can create a software solely based on functional requirements. You buat sajalah. You buat, you write the code just to fulfill the functional requirements. Then you deliver to your customer. Tapi the quality attributes are not there. So basically, yes, you can create the software, but it is not of a good quality. So what is the use of it? Still, at the end of the day, it is your system will be unusable. Yeah. So it is very important to have functional with non-functional requirements. So going back to non-functional requirements, failing to meet a non-functional requirement can mean that the whole system is unusable. We can see a simple example over here. If an aircraft system, for example, like our airplane system, AirAsia ke Mars ke, does not meet its reliability requirements, it will not be certified as safe for operation. Because as you can see, for systems like aircraft system, when you want to build the system for this kind of organization, they have a certain standard procedures that needs to be followed. If you are unable to follow this or apply these standard procedures into the system, then they cannot allow the system to be used, not certified as safe. Okay, so other types of non-functional requirements, we can see hierarchy over here. We have product requirements, organization requirements, external requirements. Under product requirements, you have usability, efficiency, dependability, security, and under efficiency, you have performance, you have space. So this is basically relating to the product itself, the system itself. And then under organizational requirements, this is basically referring to the organization that will be using the system. Of course, we need to follow what kind of environmental requirements are required when you want to deploy the system onto the site. The operational requirements as well, the development requirements, and then any other external requirements. For example, regulatory, ethical, legislative. For legislative, we have accounting requirements, safety or security, and so forth. So when you want to develop or write the non-functional requirements, you can refer to these types of non-functional requirements. You can refer to this category and then produce whichever non-functional requirements that is or that are suitable to the system that you want to build. Okay. All right. Because for non-functional requirements, it may be very difficult to state precisely, and imprecise requirements may be difficult to verify. Verify meaning to say you need to check whether that requirement has been implemented or is correct or not. Because when you compare functional and non-functional requirements, for functional requirements, it is straightforward. You just give the services, you just write what services, what the system will do, then that's it. But for non-functional requirements, it can be subjective. For example, maybe the customer said, I want to have the system to be of high security. I want to protect data of my customer. But how? How can you, as a developer, how can you implement it? And then how can you verify whether the system has high security, enable protection, fully protection of the data. So in this case, whenever possible, when you want to write the non-functional requirements, you need to write it in a quantitative manner. What is quantitative manner? Quantitative meaning something that can be measured at the end of the day. So it needs to be objective. All right? Objective meaning to say you know what to achieve. You know what is the output. So because of that, when you want to write the non-functional requirements, you can pair it with metrics to measure the requirements. So the metrics, as you can see over here, you can use speed, for example, to measure the speed, you can use process transactions per second, user or event response time, screen refresh time. I think you can, I think you have seen this few times. You oftenly seen this response time, refresh time. So you just give, for example, when a user click a certain event, so the response time the system should give should be under 0.00001 second. So you have a metric to measure. You have a value to measure. When you implement this non-functional requirement, you can test. When you test it, okay, the response time is below the given value, meaning it is a success. If let's say the response time is higher than the given value, so you need to fix your program so that it will fulfill this requirement. So other than that, size, you can see how to measure using bytes, number of ROM chips, ease of use, training time, number of help frames, reliability, mean time to failure, probability of unavailability, rate of failure occurrence, availability, robustness, time to restart after failure, percentage of events causing failure, probability of data correction on failure, portability, percentage of target dependent statements, number of target systems. So when you have these metrics, it will be a lot easier to verify your non-functional requirements. So you can justify to your customer, yes, I have achieved these non-functional requirements. You can see, yeah, you can compare the result and the target, right? So these are a few examples of requirements for the case study that we have previously. So you can see under functional requirements, how to write the requirements. You can see that usually we will use shall be able. The reason why, because as I said just now, requirements engineering happens during the earlier phase of your development, meaning to say you don't have the system yet. So if you don't have the system yet, you need to use present tense statements, shall be able. If you want to use will, also can. However, shall be able is more suitable. You don't use present tense. Kan present tense kan, present is current kan. Saya tak ingat dah. But you do understand, right? Shall be able will be something that has not happened yet, but will happen in the future. That's how you write the requirements. I hope you understand. Nah? So we can see the example over here. Future tense. Yes, thank you, Ramadhani. I'm sorry for my ni. Biasalah ya. Kita dah lama tak buat kelas ni. So future tense. Thank you, Ramadhani. So as you can see, number one, a user shall be able to search the appointments list for all clinics. Number two, the system shall generate each day for each clinic a list of patients who are expected to attend appointments that day. Number three, each staff member using the system shall be uniquely identified by his or her 8-digit employee number. So you can see that basically this involves the functionalities of the system, what the system shall be able to do, right? You need to remember, I always advise my students, the way you write the requirements is very important. When you write the requirements, one statement shall represent a single function. Don't write multiple functions in a single statement. You can write as simple as possible. Just ensure that you write a single statement for a single function. And then usually you can start to write it. A user shall be able to, the system shall be able to. So meaning a user shall be able to will be what will be the functionality that the user can do with the system. Kalau you write it as the system shall be able to, meaning what is the response from the system whenever given a certain situation or certain input. Other than that, you can also write it as more particular. For example, number three, each staff member, rather than using a user. Because if you say a user shall be able to uniquely identified by his or her 8-digit employee number, that word a user is too general. A user can be anybody, right? So you don't want to allow that. You want it to be more precise. So you can write more precise who is the user. So each staff member. Okay. And then for non-functional requirements, you can see over here divided into 3 categories. You can refer to the hierarchy just now. Product requirement. So example of non-functional requirements, the MHC PMS shall be available to all clinics during normal working hours, Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 5:30 p.m. Downtime within normal working hours shall not exceed 5 seconds in any one day. You can write it like that. So meaning to say this is under availability requirement. As well as reliability. So when it involves downtime, that is reliability requirements. And then under organizational requirements, users of the MHC PMS system shall authenticate themselves using their health authority identity card. So the reason this is under organizational requirement is because this is imposed by the organization, meaning they have their own health authority identity card, so they can authenticate themselves using that card through the system. And then external requirement, the system shall implement patient privacy provisions as set out in #1003/2006 privacy. So this is the rules or the legislative requirements under that, right? Okay. Now, before we proceed with the next part, because we will look at the requirements engineering process, I think, shall we have a break? Maybe 5 minutes break? Boleh, ha? After 5 minutes, kita continue balik. Boleh tak? Ke semua dah break dah? Tengah break sekarang ni. Okay, so I'll see you guys in 5 minutes. Kita relax, stretch dulu. Okay, attendance, yes. I will share the attendance during break ni. Okay. So, before our break just now, we have looked into what is a requirement. So requirement basically taken from the customers or the stakeholders, to be precise, because stakeholders can be everyone involving in the software development. And then all the activities, getting the requirements, analyzing it, producing proper documentations, verifying it, validating the requirements. So these are what we call as requirements engineering. So requirements engineering happens at the earliest phase of software development, meaning to say before we can design and implement the system, we need to collect the requirements first. All right. So now let us look into the processes involved in requirements engineering. We can see the spiral processes over here. Why is it spiral? Because it's the same as any software development. Software development does not, the processes do not only happen once, but it happens in a cycle or in iteration. So requirements engineering is the same thing as well. It happens in a cycle or it happens in few iterations. So you can see over here, for requirements engineering process, there is no one specific ataupun one specific model for it ataupun specific processes for it. The processes can be vary depending on the type of system that you want to develop or depending on the application domain. However, the generic activities, we have requirements elicitation, requirements analysis, requirements validation, requirements management. So as you can see over here, in practice, it is iterative. Usually we start off with, so you can see, this is the starting. We start off with requirements elicitation. So you can see we have the business requirement specification. We need to do the feasibility study. So you can see along the way, it will visit the processes, requirement specification, requirements validation, yeah, and then we have user requirements elicitation, user requirements specification, prototyping, system requirements elicitation, system requirements specification and modeling, reviews, and at the end of the day, you will have system requirements document. So what are these things we will look at along the way? So first, we will look at requirements elicitation and analysis. We group them together lah, ya. Under requirements elicitation and analysis, it is also called as requirements discovery. So meaning to say we discover the requirements. This is the first phase under requirements engineering. Under requirements elicitation, there are few activities involved as well. So you can see we need to do requirements discovery, followed by requirements classification and organization, and then requirements prioritization and negotiation, and then we have requirements specification. So when we look at requirement specification, yeah, this actually the process of documenting the requirements. Kita akan lihat in detail afterwards. So software engineers work with a range of system stakeholders to find out about the application domain. Now, of course, we need to understand before we can collect the requirements, we need to understand what is the domain for the application that we want to build. If the domain is on education, so we can discuss on relevant requirements only relating to education domain, or if let's say it is a specific domain to the company, for example, like for salary management, so we will discuss requirements relating to salary management only. Yeah. And then we need to also discuss the services that the system should provide, the required system performance, also the hardware constraints. Meaning to say, not only that we need to discuss on the functionalities of the requirement or the quality attributes, but we also need to discuss on uh, what hardware that will be used for the system. Yeah, and then other than that, other systems as well. Will the system that we want to build will interact with another existing systems from the company? So you need to discuss on that. Just a brief explanation on every activities. For requirements discovery, this is where we need to interact with stakeholders to discover their requirements. And then requirements classification and organization is where we can group related requirements and organizes them into coherent clusters. So the reason why we need to classify the requirements is basically it will be a lot easier when we want to design the modules. So when we want to design the modules, if you have related requirements that group together to represent a specific cluster, so you can make a module out of it. This is also important or useful when we want to do object-oriented software development. And then after that, prioritization and negotiation is basically we prioritize the requirements and resolving any requirements conflicts. So basically, this is where it is important that you often communicate with your stakeholders or your client, because you want to ensure that you have the relevant requirements, because at the end of the day, you need to validate these requirements with your stakeholders, whether the stakeholders need this requirement or not. And then requirement specification, we document the requirements as input into the next round of spiral, whereby when you see the previous slide just now, so the document will be used for this process, requirement specification. That's why we need to document the requirements. So when we do requirements elicitation, there are some challenges or problems that we may face. For example, stakeholders don't know what they really want. They only know that they want you to create a system for their company, for their organization. Let's say, for example, they want to have a system, saya ambil contoh yang sama lah, salary management system. And they just say to you they want to have a system that can manage the salary, to calculate salary and so forth. But they don't really know how to express the features, the services that the system should offer. So this is one of the challenges that developers may face. So what you can do with it is that you can suggest requirements to them. When you suggest requirements to them, try to suggest in a user requirement level. Still remember, so meaning to say you need to suggest general requirements that the stakeholders can understand. So when you suggest these requirements, they can simply read it and negotiate or whether to accept or to reject these requirements. So it can actually help them, guide them to decide. Maybe once they read the requirement, they have the idea of what they want, what kind of features that they want with the system. And then other than that, stakeholders express requirement in their own terms. This is also another problem. Sometimes we can have clients or customers that cooperate well with us, meaning to say the communication is good. Yeah, you can understand them, they can understand you. But sometimes you can have clients that they only say what they or maybe they only want to hear what they want. No, there can be stakeholders like this because we are dealing with humans as well. So sometimes the stakeholders, the way they express their requirements, they understand it like that. However, you as the developer, maybe you understand it differently. Yeah. For example, maybe the client say that they want the system to be available by the public. Let's say, for example, you want to create a website for them. So they say that they want the system to be available to public, but they also want to restrict some access, for example. So once they express it like that, could be the way they understand it is that the user or the public don't need to have any sort of account using the system. But the way you understand it is that the public also need to create or register an account with the system to protect the data and so forth, or to protect the information that you want to display with the system. So in this case, these are the things that you need to communicate, because communication is the key. Try to really understand what they want to express, And then let's say, for example, when the stakeholders express the requirements, you try to guide them, you try to ask them, is this what you mean, and so forth. And then different stakeholders may have conflicting requirements. This is also another problem, because stakeholders or the person that you will communicate to collect requirement is not only one person. They can be two, they can be more than two. Yeah, many people that you need to communicate. They can be the manager or the target user. Maybe the manager will tell you they want the system to do it like this. But the target user, because they are familiar with the process, they inform you they want the system to operate like this. So you have conflict over there. So how to resolve the conflict? Again, it is your responsibility. You try to communicate with them. Maybe you try to suggest the requirements that are suitable or that can fulfill both needs. And then we have organizational and political factors that may influence the system requirements. This one also one of the problem as well, that we cannot avoid, especially if you want to build large system. So there are several, maybe for that organization, there are different departments. So different departments, they have their own policies that you need to take into account. Yeah. So this is one of the problems. And then another one, the requirements change during the analysis process. New stakeholders may emerge and the business environment change. This can also happen. For example, just now, siapa yang tanya? Zulfika ke yang tanya soalan just now? If let's say there are new requirements emerge, so you have done the requirements engineering, you want to proceed with analysis and design. So what you should do? This can happen because stakeholders, they can change their mind anytime because they don't understand that you have a development process that you need to follow, right? So because we need to follow what the stakeholders want. So because of that, this one we will look into requirements change later on. I think during software evolution after this. And then there can also be situation whereby could be the previous manager is being replaced with a new manager. So meaning if you new manager, you will have another different requirement. So these are the things that we need to face in real life situation when you do requirements elicitation and analysis. Okay, the process activities involved when we collect requirements is that as I said just now, the key is interaction with the system stakeholders, from managers to external regulators. This is where we can collect information about the required and existing systems and extract the user and system requirements from this information. So meaning to say, when you do interaction with your stakeholders, after that, you need to be able to extract both the user requirements and the system requirements based on the information that you have. Because when you interact with your stakeholders, I think most of you have taken your FYP, right? So you at least have experience communicating with real clients, so you know how it is. Yeah, that's why you need to be able to just ask any possible questions that you can in order to collect as much as possible. So in this example, based on the same case study, this can be the stakeholders of MHC PMS. Yeah? We can have the patients, doctors, nurses, medical receptionists, IT staff, medical ethics manager, healthcare managers, medical record staff. So you can see that there are many stakeholders involved And then it means that a lot of work needs to be done when collecting the requirements. It is not enough that you only ask few stakeholders or few clients. You need to ask everyone involving with the system, the one who will be using the system, the one who is responsible for the system, the one who will be contributing to the system, the one who will be affected by the system. Okay, different ways to discover the requirements, to collect the requirements. There are a few suggestions. So when we say interacting, it doesn't mean that you only like informally talk with your client, with your customers. You need to actually do some formal communication. For example, number one is by interviewing. It can be formal or informal interviews with the stakeholders. The types of interview that you can conduct, close interviews, for example, you have written a few lists of questions. So you only ask your stakeholders based on the questions. Or you can also have open interview questions whereby you ask open-ended question. So maybe you ask the user to explain usually how they conduct the business every day, daily. So for effective interviewing, you yourself as the interviewer, you need to be open-minded. Don't set any initial ideas of what the requirements should be. So you need to be willing to listen to your stakeholders and then prompt the interviewee to get discussions using springboard question, requirements proposal, or by working on a prototype system. That's how you can collect more requirements. Okay, second way is by using scenarios. Scenarios are real-life examples of how a system can be used. They should include the description of starting situation, description of normal flow of events, description of what can go wrong, information about other concurrent activities, and description of the state when the scenario finishes. So basically, this is by creating like a story, like a scenario of how the operations are being conducted previously. You can see the example over here, scenario for collecting medical history in MHC PMS. So you listed the initial assumption and then you write the scenario for normal situation. Normal situation, what will happen when a patient comes, how the patients will be treated and so on. And then you also write the scenario, what can go wrong. Because when you create a system, it's not only will handle the normal operation of the business process, but what happens if there are other abnormal activities? So you need to be able to have the system to handle that situations as well. And you also list other activities outside of the normal or abnormal situation. And the system state on completion. Completion meaning to say what happens after the operation ended. So this is an example of scenario. Based on this scenario, is actually when you write the story, you can actually extract the requirements based on this story. Okay, the third way is using use cases. For use cases, as I mentioned, it is based on the use case diagram, UML use case diagram. It is also scenario based, whereby we identify the actors and then the interaction between the factors and the system. So a set of use cases should describe all possible interactions with the system. So this is simple example of use cases for MHC PMS. We have several actors over here: medical receptionist, nurse, manager, doctor. So their interaction with the system will be the use cases over here. So based on these use cases, you can extract, for example, register patient, you can actually extract few related requirements when we want to register patient. Okay. Next one, we have ethnography. So ethnography is actually the process of observing and analyzing how people actually work. This is observation, meaning to say you as a developer, you go to the company and then you observe how the employees do their daily work in order to collect the requirements for the system. So over here, when you do ethnography, you don't need to interview the users, or maybe when you interview the users or employees, you only ask what kind of data that they entered, what kind of output that they expected. So in this case, the employees don't need to explain how they do their work over here. You need to observe it. So social and organizational factors of importance may be observed. Requirements that are derived from the way that people actually work rather than the way ini ada typo sikit, rather than the way which process definitions suggest that they ought to work. This way will be effective for understanding existing processes. However, if you have new requirements, this kind of technique will not be suitable, because we only observe existing processes but not new features. For new features, then you can do interviews or other ways, use cases, scenarios, and so forth. Any questions so far? So far boleh? Okay. Alright. Boleh je. Yang lain mana? Tengah makan, tengah breakfast. Okay, boleh. Boleh, Alright. Breakfast mungkin, Breakfast boleh, tapi depan laptop, or depan your PC, boleh breakfast. If madam disuruh breakfast right now pun, madam nak breakfast juga. Tapi madam perlu kelakar. Okay, let us continue. Requirement specification. Now, this is also important. As I said just now, when we do requirements engineering, all of the activities, you do interviews, you collect the requirements, you analyze the requirements, it will not be useful if you don't document the requirements. So it is very important to document the requirements, whereby this document will be used in the later phase, will be referred in the later phase when we want to do design or implementation. So this documentation process, we call it as requirements specification. If you're familiar with SRS, Software Requirements Specification Document, that will be the document that will be used to document the requirements. The process of writing on the user and system requirements in a requirements document, that is requirement specification. So still remember just now the difference in between user and system requirements. When you write the user requirements, it has to be understandable by the end users and customers who do not have technical background. And then when you write the system requirements, it must be more detailed, may include more technical information. The requirements may be part of a contract for the system development. As you can see in real implementation, before we can start off with software development, we need to create a contract. Yes, some sort of like an agreement in between the company that procure the system, that asks to develop the system, and the company that develop the system. Need to have a contract. So under this contract, under this agreement, we need to list all the schedule, the budgets, all the resources needed and so forth, as well as you can include initial requirements in the contract. So for requirements document, it is the official statement of what is required of the system developers. So basically, system developers will refer to the requirements specification. Yeah? Should include both user requirements and system requirements. However, it is not a design document. So you leave the design part out of the software requirements document. As far as possible, it should set of what the system should do rather than how it should do it. So this is example of users of a requirements document. So the users or the readers can be the system customers to check their needs, whether their needs have been listed as requirements. Can also be for the managers. This is planning to bid for the system and plan for the system development process. Can be for system engineers to understand what system is to be developed. Can be for the system test engineers. This is for validation testing later on, because we need to validate whether the requirements have been fulfilled or not after the system has been developed. And then also for system maintenance engineers, whereby this is to enable the maintenance process afterwards. So need to understand the system and the relationship between its part. So what should be included in the requirements document? Okay, so basically, for the software requirements document, we need to have a certain standard for it. So meaning to say the documents must come with what kind of standard that we want to follow. Usually IEEE standards, that is the standard for software engineering, for software development. So the general structure of requirements document, you can see example over here. It has the preface, it has introduction, glossary, user requirements definition, system architecture, system requirement specification, system models, system evolution, appendices, index. So these are some of the things that need to be included inside the requirements document. But sometimes, for example, like IEEE standard, they have a specific template that you can just download and fill in. Yeah. And then how to write the system requirement specification. Basically, you can write using natural language. So it is very important. Each sentence should express one requirement. Penting. Then you have the structured natural language. Structured meaning to say you write it in a form or a template, not a sentence, not a statement. And then also design description languages. This is a language like a programming language, but more abstract features. It's not a program code. Maybe you can write the pseudocode over here. And then it also have graphical notations, graphical models supplemented by text. You can also use UML, use case sequence diagram. And then also we have mathematical specification. So this is basically to explain any mathematical concepts. For example, like finite state machines or sets. All right, so that is for the software requirements document. Next, for requirements validation, it is concerned with demonstrating that the requirements define the system that the customer really wants. Basically, it goes like this. First, you collect requirements from your customer, from your client. So once you have produced the software requirements document, then developer will start off with the analysis, design, implementation, and then when it goes to testing, we need to validate whether the features that have been implemented meet with the requirements. So that is validation. So validation will check for validity. Does the system provide the functions which best support the customer's needs? Consistency, are there any requirements conflicts? Completeness, are all functions required by the customer included? Realism, can the requirements be implemented given available budget and technology? Verifiability, can the requirements be checked? So these are the things that we need to check for the requirements. The techniques that can be used for requirements validation. Number one, we have requirements review. So meaning when you want to check for the requirements validity, you can do review. Review is systematic manual analysis of the requirements. Meaning to say you read through the requirements and you check manually with the system that you have developed. And then number two, you can also use prototyping. Prototyping meaning to say you have a set of requirements, you write the code to implement this set of requirements, and then you test whether it meets the requirement, and that is prototyping. So prototyping is not actually the completed system. Yeah, it is only it's like the a version of the system that fulfills the requirement. And then number three, we have the test case generation, whereby this is using test cases. So you develop test cases to check for every requirements, whether they exist in the system or not. That is requirements validation. Any questions so far? So basically we have covered under requirements engineering process, we have covered the requirements elicitation and analysis. We have covered the requirements validation, and yeah. So next one, we will look into requirements management. This is where we want to manage the changing requirements during requirements engineering process and system development. New requirements tend to emerge as a system is being developed and after it has gone into use. So meaning to say during development, you can have new requirements. After the system has been deployed, you can also have new requirements. So how can you handle or manage whenever new requirements or changes of requirements happen? You need to keep track of individual requirements and maintain links between dependent requirements so that you can assess the impact of requirements changes. So meaning to say over here, that's why for every you have the requirements document, right? In the requirements document, it is also written what version the requirements is. Yeah, whether it is the first version, and then let's say if we have any changes, so you produce the second version. If you have another changes, you produce a second version, or if you have new requirements, then you produce another version. So meaning to say over here is that the way you manage the requirements is relating to the way you document the requirements. Because whatever changes, whatever new requirements added, you need to document them. Who uh, who did the requirements changes and everything, when it is done, what kind of changes being implemented. Yeah, so you need to document all this so that whenever whenever you want to develop the system, so you know that which requirement that you need to follow. Of course, you need to follow the latest one. And then also you can assess the impact of the changes of requirement. Let's say, for example, you have developed the prototype, yeah, and then there are some changes to the requirement. So you can assess whether it is necessary to make the changes or not. Yeah, maybe the changes to the requirements will cause the system not to operate properly. So you need to backtrack your requirements. And then you need to establish a formal process for making change proposals and linking this to system requirements. So meaning to say over here, whenever you have changes in requirements, you must document them in a formal way. So this will be the requirements management planning. Yeah? So what you can do whenever you have any changes or new requirements emerge. Establish the level of requirements management detail that is required. So the requirements management decisions can include requirements identification. So each requirement must be uniquely identified so that it can be cross-referenced with other requirements. So that's why when you look into real documentation, every requirements should be numbered. Yeah, that's why when you write requirements, it must represent a single function, yeah, a single feature, because every requirement is numbered, yeah, will be labeled. Why? Because whenever you make any changes, you can just cross-reference based on the numbering. Okay. A change management process. This is the set of activities that assess the impact and cost of changes. Okay, so basically for the change management process, because we need to ensure that any new changes or any new requirements added will not affect existing prototype and system prototype that we have, or any existing schedule or cost of the project. And then next one, traceability policies. These policies define the relationships between each requirement and between the requirements and the system design that should be recorded. Uh, this one is relating to how we want to trace each changes of the requirements. So we have a policy for this traceability. And then lastly, to support, tools that may be used range from specialist requirements management systems to spreadsheets and simple database system. Other than, because you want to document the changes, right? Other than that, you can also use simple spreadsheets in order to manage the requirements changes. Or maybe if your company, the company you work with, has simple database systems, you can use that to track down the changes. Okay, for requirements change management, it is not necessarily that every you must accept every changes. Okay, so that's why you need to have a proper process for it. So to decide if a requirements change should be accepted, this will be the steps or the processes. As you can see, identified problem. So we do problem analysis and change specification. Under this activity, the problem or the change proposal is analyzed first. We need to check whether it is valid or not. And then this analysis is fed back to the change requester, who may respond with a more specific requirements change proposal or decide to withdraw the request. Before we can do any changes, we need to do this first. We need to analyze and we need to agree on the changes being made. And then after that, once it is agreed, it will go to the change analysis and costing. As you can see, whenever there are any changes, it will affect the cost of the project. So because of that, we need to do analysis first. The effect of the proposed change is assessed using traceability information and general knowledge of the system requirements. Once this analysis is completed, then we can make decision whether or not to proceed with the changes. And once it is agreed, then we can go to change implementation, whereby this is where the requirements document and when necessary, the system design and implementation will be modified. So ideally, the document should be organized so that changes can be easily implemented. Then lastly, you can have the revised requirements, where you document the revised requirements into the requirements document. So you can see it is not as easy as there is a change, you immediately change your system. So there should be a process for it because there are few things affected by the changes. Done. Any question so far? So after the break, we have covered the requirements engineering processes. Okay, so let me go back to the slide, requirements engineering processes. Okay, here it is. Yeah, we have looked into the elicitation and analysis, basically referring to how we collect the requirements, what are the activities involved. And then after that, we have looked into the validation of the requirements, whereby we validate, meaning to say when you do requirements validation, this is where you agree with the or you have finalized the requirements to be given to the development team to maybe start with the design or start with the development. And then after that, for requirements management, because it is very important to manage all the changes of the requirements, and then if new requirements emerge, we need to know how to manage. So basically, it is relating to the change proposals, whether we agree with the changes or not. Yeah? And then once we have agreed with it, then we can proceed with changing the requirements by implementing in the system. And then you need to document the changes by stating the versions, by using unique ID to identify the requirements, and then so that you can do traceability for the requirements. Okay. Any question so far? Ada soalan tak? Tak ada. Where are the rest? No for me. Okay, no question. So, do you understand requirements engineering? Dah faham dah what is requirements engineering? Boleh faham Okay. Meaning to say, if let's say you are given a project, you can do requirements engineering. Boleh Because as you can see, for requirements engineering, it can be a career path as well, because requirements engineering involves many things as well. And then it is critical phase when we do software development. Collecting the requirements is not easy. Okay, I have one question. Is the steps can be also used for web development project? Yes. It can be used in any kinds of project, whether it is small project or large scale project. It can be any sort of application, web application, apa ni, standalone system ke, enterprise system ke, you can apply the same steps. Because basically, as I said before this, whenever you want to create a program, it is not as simple as you just sit down and write your code. No, but you need to collect the requirements first, especially in real world implementation, whereby you are dealing with real people outside. Meaning to say, other organization wants to pay you to create a system for them. So you cannot just simply do the system as you wish, because the money is from them. So you need to ask your client what kind of services that they want with the system. So any kind of project is suitable using the requirements engineering steps. Any other question? How about the requirements? Do you understand how you can write the requirements? Functional and non-functional requirements. Do you feel like after this you can write your own requirements? Boleh? Boleh tak? For functional and non-functional requirements, even though these two are different, functional requirements based on the services offered by the system, and then non-functional will be based on the quality attributes. But sometimes you cannot avoid to have overlapping. Yeah, sometimes when you come up with requirements, you will come across with requirements whereby it can be functional, it can be non-functional. For example, like for security purpose, logging into the system. Yeah, it can be functional requirements whereby you can see that the user can access the system by entering the correct username and password. So that can be functional, but it can also be non-functional, whereby because it relates to security, right? So in order to impose security to your system, only authorized user that has the username and password can enter the system. So there shouldn't be, what I want to say is that if you have this kind of situation, it shouldn't be a problem. There can be overlapping in between functional and non-functional requirements. However, you need to, as much as possible, try to differentiate in between these two, because sometimes you have requirements that are direct. Yeah, straight away you know that this must fall under functional requirements. This must fall under non-functional requirements. Okay. Okay, another question. Functional requirement wise, which will Madam recommend for e-commerce application use case or user story? As I said just now, there is no best way in producing or describing the functional requirement. You can use use case, you can use user story. It doesn't matter on what kind of domain that you want to create an application, as long as you are familiar with the method. If you are familiar with use case, you use use case. If you are familiar with user story, you can use user story. Because if you look into both of this technique, for use case, you have the use case diagram, you have the use case description, right? Or use case specification. Usually, when we have use case diagram, we will pair it with use case description or use case specification. If you still remember, the tabular form, whereby it has uh, the uh, the uh, the actor who invoked the use case, the description of the use case, the condition, precondition, post-condition, and then also the normal flow, alternate flow. So basically you have the description of what the use case should perform. And then other than that, you need to also pair it with sequence diagram. So sequence diagram basically to show the interaction of objects invoking another objects, yeah, exchanging messages in order to perform that particular use case. So it's when you use case, it's elaborate, yeah. And then if you use user story, it's also elaborate as well, yeah. Because when you use the user story, the advantage is that you are always interacting with your client. Yeah, you are always in a conversation with your client in order to get the requirements correctly. So they are cross in for both of this way, use case or user story, regardless of any kind of application that you want to build. So there is no exact answer, Ramadhani. Okay, for example, my client requested that the system database security follows certain security standard. Is this functional or non-functional requirement? This should be under non-functional. So let us look at the hierarchy. All right. Everyone can see the question, right? Okay, so for Zulfikar, his client requested that the system database security follows certain security standard. So this security standard, okay, it's either two, whether this security standard is under where the organization itself imposed the standard, so it will be under organizational requirements. Okay, so maybe under operational or environmental requirements, but basically maybe operational requirements. And then if let's say that security standard is imposed by worldwide, it's not by only that organization but worldwide, so it can be under external requirements, maybe regulatory yeah, or maybe under legislative safety security. So basically, for this kind of requirements, it falls under non-functional. Why is it non-functional? Because it is not related to the services offered, right? So how you can decide? So it's like this. It's how I asked the question just now. Can you create a system solely by using functional requirements? My answer is yes just now, right? But you will create a system, but with no quality. But the system can function. So it's the same thing. If you ask the question, okay, the system database security follows certain security standard. If you don't follow that requirement, can you just build the system solely by implementing the functionalities? Yes. So meaning this may not fall under functional, it may fall under non-functional requirements. It is also depending on how you write the requirements as well. Yeah. So when you, if you are sure this is under non-functional, so you write it as a non-functional requirements. Okay. Hopefully Zulfika boleh faham kenapa kenapa it can fall under non-functional. So it involves security. You can have a system without security, kan? So security is actually to give value to your system, to make your value of higher quality. So kalau macam tu, then it can fall under non-functional. Right? Any other question? Zulfika, you dah kerja? Because your question, you ask about your client or freelancer. Okay. So, okay. So you are doing development, freelancer for software development, Zulfika. Okay, good. So it's good for you to join the lecture series. Good information for you, kan? Okay, Danish. To conclude, non-functional just add on to the basic system. You can say it like that. You must have added value. Yeah, but you must remember, for software engineering standards, whenever we create a software, you not only want to deliver services from that software, from a certain product. You don't only want to deliver the services, but you also want to produce quality product. But I'm sure it's not only software, kan? Any kind of product, physical product pun macam apa ni, macam katalah physical product, macam contoh pen kan, macam pen kan, you not only want this pen to keluarkan ink for you to enable it to write, but you also want to produce quality pen. Quality maksud dia keluarkan ink, tapi bila you tulis tu memang lancar, you tak ada tersekat-sekat. So both must go on together lah. Quality memang add on value, tapi both mesti ada. So it applies the same thing to software as well. Okay. Any other questions? Bagus, you tanya soalan, you guys tanya soalan, so meaning to say you do understand apa yang saya cuba sampaikan. That's why you ada soalan. Ada lagi soalan? Okay, so basically our FYP is just a prototype because we only focus on the functionality. But if we want to make our FYP become a real usable system, we need to add more requirement like non-functionality requirement. Okay, yes, your FYP is a prototype, but you cannot, to say that it only focus on functionality, mungkin tak juga betul, ya. Because when you create your FIP system, do you create a login, apa ni, a login function? Ada tak? Wei Seng. So if you have a login function, that is a part of non-functionality requirement because you want to impose security. You don't want anybody to enter the system. Only those with username and password. So at least you ada some sort of security for your FYP. It doesn't mean that you don't have any non-functional. Cuma for your FYP level, the non-functional requirements is not not like real world implementation. Kalau real implementation, for example, like when you, I think maybe Zulfika, maybe you have clients asking for this, right? You need to create system that has faster response time, tak boleh crash kalau apa ni, kalau user access multiple users access at the same time, so you need to be able to handle the access using your system. And then also another thing adalah when you create your system tu, you need to ensure that when your system is executing, running, it must be able to efficiently use resources like your RAM. Dia tak boleh crashkan RAM tu. So there is a way for you to write your program lah to enable this. So ada banyak, behind that ada banyak. Bila you later on when you involve in real development, you try to as much as possible, try to learn more about how you can achieve the non-functional requirements. Other than that, I think for network computing students, if relating to network, that is also a part of non-functional requirements. Bila kita nak access the network, can we need to have some sort of protocols, and then whenever we want to exchange data within the network, we need to have some sort of security to wrap the data, especially private data. So itu non-functional requirement. Yeah. Okay, what about scalability? Scalability ni dia depending on what kind of system that you want to build. Because sometimes when we have scalability ni, maksudnya you can expand your system, you can add more features to the system. Right? Sometimes when you create a system to for your client, sometimes system tu dia function dia macam tu saja. Even after 5 years time, contohlah, saya bagi contoh sama salary management system. Sometimes you katalah now you are using the system, after 5 years time, you can still use the system with existing features. There's no need for you to add new features. Tapi there are some systems, for example, like enterprise system, usually large system, where dia punya business processes can change in the future. For example, contoh macam sistem enterprise, usually it involves apa Astra AZ, apa Astra AZ? Okay, contoh saya tak dapat fikirkan contoh sekarang ni lah. But just think about it like this. Macam ni lah. The system that we have in our in Unimas. If you still remember last time, we don't have system like QR attendance, kan? We don't have system like apa lagi sistem yang baru. So meaning, whatever the system that we have 10 years before this, existing system that we have 10 years before this, you need to ensure that this system is able to be expanded. Kita boleh add new features into it. So meaning to say, katalah 10 tahun sebelum ni, kita dah plan, okay, this system, mungkin ada lagi sistem baru that will communicate ataupun new features to be added inside the system. So you need to enable it to be scalable. Kalau you tak ada plan yang macam tu, after 10 years time, your existing system will be obsolete, cannot be used. So you need to create another new system to replace the old system. So that is scalability. Okay, ada soalan lagi? Tak ada soalan. Alright. So, if no question, we will take a break. Jangan pergi dulu, jangan pergi dulu. We will take a break about 15 minutes lah, because now my time is 10:44. So 10:45, we will take a break and then continue at 11 a.m. Tapi before we take a break too, I have just a simple activity for you guys. So over here, ini just kita imagine lah, you own a small cafe selling handcrafted drinks and delicious cakes and pastries. So during this pandemic time, as you all know that ada tempat we cannot dine in ataupun ada boleh dine in pun cuma 2 orang saja. Katalah you nak you nak tak boleh berkumpul right now lah, but maybe you want to give to your friends ke. So you require a mobile application that will process online orders from only nearby customers and then allow to arrange for delivery or pickup. So based on this just simple case study tu, can you list the functional and non-functional requirements that you would like to propose for your mobile application? So basically, you as a client, you're not a developer, but you as a client. So what kind of functional and non-functional requirements that you like to propose to the developer? So there's no need for you to write it in a technical manner. Kalau you nak tulis secara technical pun boleh. Kalau secara, so you as a client kan, so you nak apa yang you boleh faham. So you tulis both functional, non-functional. If you want to write, saya nak minimum one of each sajalah. Kalau you nak write more than one tu, it's up to you. So satu functional, satu non-functional. I will open another column in my Padlet just now. I will edit under there and then you can post your answer over there. Yeah. Okay, cuba you nak tulis, you tulis ke screenshot ke? Remember pasal screenshot ni? Okay. So kita dah habis session. Before we go to break, it's time for photo session. Boleh tak open your webcam sekejap je? Ada yang dah bersedia dah. It's nice to see you guys. Okay, let me see how I can arrange this. Show grid view. Okay, I think I need to screenshot few nanti ya, because kalau guna grid view kan, grid view ni just few people in one interface ni. So saya akan screenshot few times nanti ya. Sekejap ya. Mana yang lain? Kita dah lunch ni. Okay, ada. Okay, tunggu sekejap ya. Okay, let me do the first screenshot. Okay, standby ya. You nak posing macam mana ke? You nak posing. Saya tak boleh nak buat peace because I need to use both of my hands ya. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3 ya. Okay, itu satu. Sekejap ya. Okay, tunggu sekejap. Tunggu sekejap. Okay, let me take another part. Oh, ada yang tak on webcam ni, tapi I'll just screenshot saja. Posing saja because you wouldn't know you will be screenshot or not kan. Okay, posing saja. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Dan saya rasa yang lain saya rasa cukup lah kot. Ya. Sekejap ya. Okay. Thank you so much untuk yang spotting ni. Ada yang problem kamera, tak apa. Tak ada masalah. At least I have 1 or 2 screenshot is enough lah ya. Right. So buat aktiviti ni ya during break. I'll see you again. So dah ambil masa dah tadi. I think around 11:10 macam tu. Kita jumpa balik ya. 11:10 ya. So I'll see you guys later. Okay. Enjoy your break.